Every year around the world, you've probably seen this on the news as well, whales tend to beach themselves. Now, this happens. In fact, this week I was Googling news about whales on beaches and encountered there was a whale beached, a humpback whale, supposedly a juvenile. Notice the size, a juvenile whale on the beach in Delaware, Bethany Beach in Delaware, and they realized after it had beached itself, it was already dead and was buried this week on the beach in Delaware. But around the world, just a few weeks ago, there was about 6 beached whales in New Zealand. This is a common occurrence, and usually when it happens, there is a response from the locals, and many times you'll have people rush down to the beach and they'll be carrying buckets of seawater to keep the mammal moist and try to help it so that it can eventually return to sea whenever high tide returns. But of course, there are all kinds of issues going on. Just being out of the water is not good for them. The sheer weight of their bodies works against them and can actually cause organs and whatnot to collapse and not work properly. And honestly, many of them are not ever returned safely to the ocean. And you would think that after all that effort and maybe not as much success, that people would give up on it. But honestly, whenever it happens, you still have these whale lovers who go out and do everything they can to save a whale. There must be something in the human psyche that says to people, every life is worth saving. And that's exactly what I want you to think about as we get into the message today. Is every life saving? And of course, I'm not really interested today in whales on beaches in Delaware or New Zealand. I'm really interested in the tiny life that is conceived in the womb of a woman. Is every life worth saving? In fact, we really ought to extend this because it isn't just about the unborn. This really applies from the infant in the womb to the infirm nearing the tomb. Every life is worth saving. Is it worth it? That's the title of the message. Now, many pro-lifers and Christians who hold that position believed that after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which happened almost 4 years ago in 2022, that we would see a reduction in abortions across America. And that was a good wish or hope. But actually, the latest statistics from 2024 demonstrate that abortions are slightly up. Now, it's not a huge amount, but there were over 1 million abortions committed in the United States alone in 2024. And I want to ask you this question again. Is it worth it? Is it worth saving every life? In fact, I bring this question up because I believe it's being debated by Christians and in Christian homes. I know of Christians who've debated this issue. Not all of them have gone through it, but they have had to debate whether or not to keep the child growing in the womb. Have you given up the fight for life? Are we simply going to swim downstream with the rest of culture on this? And I ask you that because according to, this is the name of the organization, Save the Storks. It's an anti-abortion organization. But according to a poll done in November of 2019, so just over 6 years ago, only 47% of self-identified evangelical Christians identify as pro-life. That's less than half of Christians in our circles identify as pro-life. So I ask you again, is every life worth saving? As strange as it may seem, some in this room are going to face this question. We could kind of wish it out there somewhere else, that it isn't going to touch our home. It isn't going to touch our daughter. It isn't going to touch our granddaughter. It isn't going to affect us. But the truth is, it could happen to anyone in this room. What advice would you give to a daughter or to a granddaughter facing an unexpected pregnancy. What would you say when the pressure mounts and the choice for life seems like the most difficult choice of all? I'd really like to bring this issue back into the forefront. Even though Roe v. Wade has been overturned, we need to continue to give this issue attention as believers. And we pick this Sunday every year, the third Sunday of January, to emphasize this because this marks the anniversary of the passing of Roe v. Wade in 1973. So that's why this date is picked, and that's why we continue to come back to this issue. So I picked today what I believe is one of the messiest pregnancies that ever occurred, to bring up the issues or the questions that really haunt believers and young unplanned pregnancies that young women face. And I'm going to take a look at the birth of Moses. Exodus chapter number 2, and we're going to begin reading in our text with verse number 1. Exodus 2 and verse number 1, and the Bible says, "There went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.' Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, 'Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?' And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, 'Go.' And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, 'Take this child away, nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages.' And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and she became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, 'Because I drew him out of the water.'" I'd like you to consider with me 3 important questions that often come up in the debate about abortion. And I want to use Moses' example and how Amram and Jochebed, those are Moses' parents. We know that from chapter 6, verse 20. Though in the text, their names remain hidden. We just know that they belong to the family of Levi, a son and a daughter, probably not immediate son and daughter, but descendants of Levi, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. These are people of faith. These are Hebrews living in Egypt during the time of bondage, which was about 400 years in Egypt, and they're living in a culture of death, a culture that says, we don't want your kid to survive. This is what they were facing. And I want to say that it's not unlike our culture today, a culture that really thrives and even encourages death, both on the front end and when it comes to euthanasia and assisted suicide, also on the back end. So they would have to choose for life in a culture of death. I think then this is a marvelous case study for anyone facing a difficult pregnancy. It's one that Christian people should turn to when they're trying to help somebody else get through these kinds of issues. So I want to answer several questions that are related to the abortion debate and the life versus death debate, especially as it concerns the unborn. Here are my questions. Number 1, is it worth it if I find it inconvenient? Number 1, is it worth it if the pregnancy is inconvenient? So what if the baby shows up at an inappropriate time, an inconvenient time? What about factors that might be less than desirable to bring a child into the world? I'm pretty sure that if we could mic up Jochebed today, if we could interview her on the platform, I think she would have a few words to say about this. I think she would maybe coach us about, and so I want her to be the coach. What would she say to us about the birth being maybe a little bit inconvenient? She's married. She already has 2 older kids. We know this from other texts. Moses' older sister is about 13. Miriam is her name. Moses has an older brother by about 3 years. His name is Aaron. They appear in the text later when Moses is journeying with the children of Israel through the wilderness. You'll run into Miriam and you'll run into Aaron. And so she already has a couple, but this kid shows up when it's not good. What's not good about the time when Moses is in Jochebed's room? Number one, there's governmental policy that's working against her. Now, I'm not just talking about that they're not going to get the tax credits they were hoping for on their tax return this year. That isn't the complication, right? The complication with the government here is that they did not want any of the male children of the Hebrews to survive. And there's a reason for this. The Hebrews were multiplying more rapidly than the Egyptians. They celebrated birth, and birth was a good thing, and that really is God's perspective on birth. Kids are a good thing, not a bad thing. And so they're multiplying more rapidly than the Egyptians, and they're fearful that their population might be overcome, or that they would join with their enemies when the enemies attacked and overthrow Egyptian civilization and government. And so Pharaoh had issued a policy. If you're in Exodus 2, you can look back at the last verse of the previous chapter, or you can look on the screen, Exodus 1:22. Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, "Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." Why couldn't Moses have been a girl? It would have saved a lot of headache for his mother and father. Can you imagine what Jochebed must have felt in this situation when she realized another baby was on the way? Maybe she began praying, "Oh God, let it be a girl. Let it be a girl this time." As a Hebrew mother at this time, let's just state some obvious facts. She had almost no control over getting pregnant. All right? She didn't have really the control of that. She had no control over the gender of the child that would be conceived in her womb. And she had absolutely no control over what the government would say about it. Do you think maybe she felt a little bit weak and vulnerable? Like things were out of her lap, that she didn't have any control? And I think that's obviously the case. But the scriptures do not suggest that she gives up on life. And in fact, she commits herself to the God of her fathers and trusts Him. And this is where we all need to be, whether we're talking about an unplanned pregnancy, whether we're talking about a kid we don't know how to raise, whether we're talking about this issue or something else. When anxieties rise and when frustrations mount and when life seems to get a little bit tricky and inconvenient, what is the Christian response? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. Just because we have no control doesn't mean God's lost control. Can I get an amen to that? Just because I don't have control doesn't mean that God has lost control. He is still King, and He is still God. And Christians need to believe that He can still do God-like things in our day and for us. Bible examples are good for us because they allow us to draw out of our situation and kind of see the whole story from the front end to the back end. You know what happens when we get into difficulty or trial? It's like we're walking through a slot canyon and the sun is falling and we think there's only one way out of that canyon and I got to get out before dark. But because we serve this great and marvelous and supernatural God, there is never just one way out. There isn't just one way. God is able to work a plan to save His people even when we can't figure it out and when the sun starts closing in. And I wish Christians would embrace that and believe it. Like Moses' mother, we need to trust God when things seem out of control. Let me come at this another way. You see, young people, and some of us older ones as well, are sometimes guilty of not giving God a chance. Would you process that for just a moment? We get dealt an unfavorable hand. Maybe we're abused or violated, mistreated, fired, injured. And sometimes those things can be life-altering. And you know what we tend to think? We think we've been done in. That person ruined my life. I'm doomed and nothing else will be right. And I want to say to you, we must give God a chance to work His plan. He has the supernatural ability of taking what is miserable and turning it into something marvelous. That's why I serve God. He is supernatural. Just this week, I was reading in the Bible, my Bible reading plan that I told you about, right? We have Bible reading plans in the Welcome Center. They're absolutely free, or they're available online under the Resources tab on our church website. Free commercial. You can get all that stuff for free, either from the Welcome Center or from online. I encourage you to read the Bible. I'm reading my Bible just like I encourage you to do, and I'm reading through Genesis, and I encounter this man named Joseph. You heard of him? And I know most of you know about Joseph, and you know about his story. His 11 brothers conspired against him, to sell him into slavery to Egypt. And he goes into Egypt, the same Egypt we're talking about in the text with Moses. And he goes down to Egypt. He has to learn a foreign language. He's in prison. And for 13 years, his life is a mess. Potiphar's wife lies about him. He's in prison. He's in prison for an undisclosed period of time, and then he interprets some dreams. Even after the dreams are interpreted and the butler gets out and the baker hangs, Joseph is still in prison for 2 more years because the butler forgot him. And then just at the right time, God takes Joseph out of the prison, interprets a dream for Potiphar, and Joseph goes from being a prisoner to prime minister overnight. When this whole thing started, it really looked hopeless for Joseph. He's going to a foreign country. He's going to be a slave. He's going to be abused. The only way he's going to get out is if he dies. And yet God had a different plan. I just want to say to you, maybe you're in a slot canyon. Maybe the sun has set and you can't figure out how to get out. Give God a chance. He can still. Would we believe as Christians that God could still marvelously turn things around and deliver me today? Let's give God a chance to work a miracle in our story today. All of us have something in our life. If we could, we would pull that page right out of the book and throw it away. All of us have stuff like that. And you know what? We have a God who's still writing the story. The book of your life isn't over. There's more to the chapter. Let God write His story. And what do we do in the meantime? Trust Him. He knows what He's doing. Let's just trust Him. He knows what He's doing. He takes the messes of our lives and turns them into miracles. I'm thankful today that government is not standing at my door trying to kill my kids. But it does leave the door open for women to kill their unborn children in the womb. And that brings me to the next part of the first point. Is it worth it, even if it's inconvenient? And the inconvenience I want us to consider is genetic problems. With the advance of modern medicine, health professionals can actually look into the womb and predict certain tendencies or harms or diseases ahead of schedule. This really can be a great resource, especially if the child is suffering from a genetic condition that must be addressed immediately or the child might die. Unfortunately, that technology has also been used for selective breeding and selecting the children I'm going to bring into the world. As a result, it eliminates It can eliminate problematic pregnancies such as Down syndrome, trisomy 13, and other genetic disorders, all with life-altering implications. Moses' mother didn't have that. And, I think motherhood was simpler before we had all the technology. Just saying. No offense. I mean, technology is good. It has its benefits, but she didn't have to deal with all that. But it does come up later in Moses' life, and so I want to bring this out. It happens a few chapters later. It's on the screen. It's Exodus chapter 4, verse number 10 and 11. The Bible says, Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I'm not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am of slow speech and of a slow tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth, or who maketh the dumb or deaf or seeing or the blind? Have not I the Lord? You see that in verse 11? The Lord takes credit. He takes credit for the dumb, those who cannot speak, the deaf, those who cannot hear, the seeing, those who see, and the blind, those who cannot. God takes responsibility for the variety in His creation, including the birth of babies, that we might say don't come with ideal chromosomes. I think I've shared this story before, but it's been a while and it's relevant here, so I'm bringing it back up. Patricia Bauer was a Washington Post reporter, actually a bureau chief, and in 2005 she published an article in the Washington Post entitled "The Abortion Debate No One Wants to Have." And here's some quotes. I'm not going to quote the whole article, but just a couple of paragraphs from her article. She said, What do we do as a society with the case of children with disabilities? I've struggled with this question almost since our daughter Margaret was born with Downs, since she opened her big blue eyes and we got our first inkling that there was a full-fledged person behind them. Whenever I'm out with Margaret, I'm conscious that she represents a group whose ranks are shrinking because of the whole availability of prenatal testing and abortion. I don't know how many pregnancies are terminated because of a prenatal diagnosis, but some studies estimate 80 to 90%. What I don't understand, here's a picture of Margaret and her family, her mom Patricia on one side, husband on the other on the screen. What I don't understand is how we as a society can tacitly write off a whole group of people as having no value. I'd like to think that it's time to put that particular piece of baggage on the table and talk about it. Patricia writes, but I'm not optimistic. People want what they want. A perfect baby, a perfect life, to which I say, good luck. Or maybe dream on. Well, that just about sums it up, doesn't it? Appreciate those words. Courageous words to say publicly 20 years ago. Question, is the life worth it, even if it's inconvenient? And I hope your answer to that question is a resounding yes. Second question that comes up in the abortion debate, is it worth it, even if I have to fight to protect it? Even if I have to fight to protect it. This comes up in Moses' life because this is exactly what Moses' mother and father have to do. Can you imagine the months leading up? The bump is getting bigger. She's getting close to full term, and she's having conversations. I'm imagining this. Don't look at your Bible. It's not in there, all right? This is from me, all right? Imagining them in the evening, and they're falling to sleep, and, Jochebed is whispering in bed to Amram, and what are we going to do? We've got a baby coming. You know what the Egyptians, they find out they're going to drown him in the river. What are we going to do? And I imagine that sometime they come up with this plan. Well, this is what we're going to do. Initially, if it turns out to be a boy, we'll hide him. And we'll keep him quiet. And we'll feed him. And we'll rock him. And we'll just make sure he's sleeping almost around the clock. We will do what we can to keep him quiet. And no doubt Miriam would play a role in this, right? Because when Jochebed needed to cook, then Miriam could take him and she could rock him, and then they were passing the baby around, keep him quiet. And then I can imagine, can you imagine with me? I can imagine that, maybe after the birth of the baby, the plan is working out, but then because she's feeding him incessantly and not putting him on a schedule just to keep him quiet, what does a baby like that? Can you imagine with me? What's happening to a baby? He's turning into a little butterball. And his lungs, they're growing, and those little whimpers he had when he was a goodly child, the text says that. He was a good baby. All right, that may not be what it means, but all right, you follow it. He was a good baby. But then he's starting to get noisy. And Jochebed and Amram are having another talk. What are we going to do? He's getting big. His cries they're going to hear, and they're going to show up, and they're going to take him, and they're having this conference, and over several days, I can imagine a plan develops, and the plan is, all right, well, Pharaoh, he did say we had to throw him into the Nile. What if we put a basket with the baby in the Nile? That's kind of what the government said, just not exactly what the government said. So I don't know, one of them knows how to make a basket, and they pitch it. The word here for pitch is the same word used in Genesis 6 to talk about Noah pitching the big ark that floated during the flood. So they pitch it so it's watertight, some kind of stuff that's ooey and sticky, but when it dries, it's hard, keeps the water out. And they put it down by the river. All of this sounds like it has a plan because Miriam is positioned on the bank, not far away, and it's not in the text, but I think this is all hatched out between Amram and Jochebed in the bed as they're talking about what to do. And they're thinking, well, maybe if we put him down where those Egyptian maidens come out, maybe one of them will find him and have compassion on him and keep him alive. And there was reason to believe that, but just so things didn't go awry, Miriam is standing on the bank. And that way, when the baby is discovered, we normally think of her just offering to nurse the child, which is what she does. Look at verse 7. Is that on the screen? Let's bring that up. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" So that verse is about, I'll go find a wet nurse to take care of the baby. But there's more to it than that. Because by saying that, Miriam is hinting, you could keep this baby alive because I can go get you a wet nurse. Do you see that there's an implication in the question? The implication is, don't turn the basket over and let the baby drown. I'll get you a wet nurse. Keep the baby alive. This all suggests to me the wisdom of a mother. The wisdom of a mother who says, I've got a plan. Maybe Amram and Jochebed worked this out ahead of time. I think they did. And notice, please, that Moses' mother just doesn't roll over and pray and say, woe is me. There's nothing I can do. Little groan. Instead, she says, let's do what we can and trust God for the rest. Do you believe every life is worth that kind of effort? Is it enough to side with life when others are against it? Thank God Jochebed had a plan, and thank God that when Pharaoh's daughter discovered her, probably positioned right where he would be discovered, she chose life for that child, and Miriam helped in that plan. But is every life worth it, even if we've got to fight to protect it? That's the ancient story. You're going, yes, Pastor, of course. Let's bring this right into modern times. Let me tell you another story. Their names are Kristen and Maurice. Maurice is from Brazil. Kristen is Canadian. They met in Canada at a school. They got married, had their first kid named Thomas. About a year later, they found themselves pregnant again, just about the time they had made a lot of plans to move to Brazil, but that's another part of the story. Suddenly they're pregnant again, and they're going in for what is considered the routine ultrasound. Some of you mothers lived during that generation, and about 20 weeks, a little bit before, a little bit after, you have this ultrasound to kind of diagnose any prenatal conditions or things that the doctors need to be aware of. At that meeting for Kristen's baby, they discovered something that wasn't quite right. So they didn't tell them and scheduled them for a more intensive ultrasound. Some of you have been through this either with yourselves or a daughter or granddaughter. So back a week later, and during that ultrasound, the second one, they determined that there was a hole in baby Nate's diaphragm. That's the muscle below your rib cage that expands and contracts so you can breathe. The result of this, it's called CDH. I gotta look at my notes. Congenital diaphragmatic hernia. And the liver and the intestines had migrated up through the hole and were in the chest cavity, threatening the organs in the chest, which you know are the lungs and the heart. In this particular case, it was threatening the lungs. They were abnormally small, and unless those organs got moved, the lungs would not function, and upon birth, the baby would not be able to breathe. It was serious. Each of their appointments after that, the doctors in Canada encouraged them toward a reduction, which is medical code language for what? Abortion or termination. Terminate your pregnancy. And each visit, and finally it got to a point where they heard it 6 or 7 times, and Kristen, being a believer, finally had to tell the doctor the way it was going to be. This is what she said. We're Christians, and that is not an option for us. You know, we believe life is sacred. We believe it doesn't come from us. It doesn't belong to us. And we are for life. All we ask is that you guys would bring everything you can that is at your resource. And we will trust God that He is going to do His best. You give your best, and God will do His best. After a long silence from the doctor in the exam room, he nodded and agreed, and the issue never came back up. Long story short, Kristen carried Nate to term. Immediately upon birth, he was intubated, put into a medical coma. 8 days later, the surgeons went into his abdomen, pulled down the intestines and liver, and patched his diaphragm. He did have several more surgeries, but his lungs did begin to grow outside the womb. It took many weeks before he came home, but today, Nate is a healthy 8-year-old boy, and here's a picture. I'm not saying that your journey, if you follow God, will come out with a pretty little bow on top of it like this story. Experience tells us otherwise. It doesn't always go the way we hope or plan. But it does show us that it's worth fighting for life and trusting God, even when the medical professionals are against us. Every life is worth fighting for, even when people are against us. And God's people, the people in this room who claim to be followers of God, should at least give Him a chance to write another miracle into the story of humanity. And let Him write a miracle into your family as well. So is every life worth it? when it's inconvenient? The answer should be yes. Is every life worth it, even if I have to fight against others to protect it? The answer is yes. And one more question that this text, Moses' pregnancy, helps us answer: is it worth it even if I have to fully surrender it? Is it worth it if I finally have to give this child away to someone else? So we all understand that sometimes a mother really is not capable of raising her own child. Medical reasons, she could die in delivery. There are a number of issues that might cause a mother not to be able to raise her own child. But is it worth having the baby still, even if I don't get to raise it? And the answer to that question is sitting right in our text. It's on the screen next, verse 10. The child grew, and she, that's Jochebed, Moses' mother, brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. That second she in the verse is Pharaoh's daughter. And she said, Pharaoh's daughter, because I drew him out of the water. Now, the irony here is that Moses' mother, because of Miriam's placement, verse 7, Miriam goes and gets the child's own mother to be nurse for her son. What a neat thing. And the Hebrews kind of had a little bit of glee like this. This would be like Americans doing something backhandedly and getting back at the Russians, or the Iranians, and they didn't see it coming. So the Hebrews they hear this story, they kind of laugh. You see this? The Egyptians are paying the Hebrews to raise their own baby. How fun is that? So every time they would tell the story, it was the Hebrews getting one up on the Egyptians. But one day, he would be weaned and he would be turned back over to Pharaoh's daughter to be raised and named by her. I know what some of you are thinking, but he's going to be raised by pagans. He will have an Egyptian haircut. He might even learn how to dress and listen to the music of the Egyptians. I can't let this be. We are people of faith. I can't give this kid away. Something bad. He might turn out bad. Can you see this? And this is what some of us think. If I give this kid away, he might get messed up. So what if I don't have any other choice and I have to give up the baby? Give God a chance. Hebrew tradition says that Moses' mother would have weaned him about 24 months. That's longer than most of us do weaning in America today, but it's likely it could have been longer. And because she had, and I'm speculating again, it's not in the text, because she had been his nurse for so long, she may have been afforded visitation rights even after it's only a guess, I don't know. But she's obviously able, to some degree, to sing to the child, to read scripture to the child, so that Moses grows up with an awareness of his forefathers and of his nation and of his people. And what happens when he comes of age? You would think that he would go with the wealth of being in Pharaoh's house or the popularity or the pomp. And what does he do? The Bible says in Hebrews, I think it's on the screen now, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 26, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He chose God's people. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Can we turn our kids over to God and trust that God, if we give him a chance, in less than ideal circumstances, can still turn kids around for God? Can we believe him for that? We ought to, because God is so much bigger, mightier, and better than we are. He wants to do good even by our kids. Can a mom trust God with her child even if she must surrender him to another family? The answer is not only yes, but it's a must. It's what people of faith do, not just in unplanned pregnancies, but with every single child. Let me explain. Even Christian parents who have the privilege of raising their kids at some point still must surrender them. At some point, they become grown. At some point, they leave home. At some point, they make their own decisions. And every parent must fully surrender his or her child to the Lord. If we don't do it at birth, we must do it at some point. What have you done with your kids? Is it okay for God to take over for you and to work in their lives and direct them the way He wants to? Will you let your kids go? Is it worth it? Even if I must fully surrender them, and I'm suggesting we all have to do that. God blessed Jochebed's early efforts, and Moses would go on to become a choice vessel for the Lord. Jochebed was only trusting God. She had no idea the full picture. She couldn't see the beginning to the end like we can. She just trusts God with the next step. She just turned her kid back over to Pharaoh's daughter. And though Moses is a Hebrew name, it is also Egyptian. In fact, his name is probably Egyptian. And the consonants, MSS, there's a little bit of a wordplay that the writer brings in that means drawn out. If you point his name with Hebrew letters, it means drawn out of the water. So there's some irony. But it's probably an Egyptian name because we have Tutmos, an Egyptian. We have Amos and Ramos. Those are all Egyptians' names, and probably Moses had something else Egyptian on the front of his name, and only the back part of his Moses sticks. So Jochebed let God take her son into the arms of a pagan, be named by a pagan, and then he would come around and end up being the deliverer for our own people. This is God. If we give God a chance, He can turn a problem pregnancy into a powerful deliverance. You just never know what God might be up to with every single birth. This makes every child valuable, every child worth saving. Because of who God is, because of how powerful He is and what He can do with problem pregnancies, every life is worth saving. And who knows? The life the child saves may be your own. Several years ago, I was put in touch with a story. I think it was maybe one of our members gave it to us. I'm going to share it with you now. It's the story of Laszlo Verez. Some of you know this name or into music. He was the director of the Tucson Orchestra, Pops Orchestra, until 2022, for 25 years, 1997 to 2022. My family actually listened to a concert some years ago that he was directing. This is his story. He actually grew up far away from Tucson. He grew up in Budapest, Hungary, in the 1940s during the German occupation of his country. He is one of 5 boys. He was the third of 5, and he lived through Nazi German occupation of Hungary. I need to tell you the story, and it's going to take just a little bit of time, but if you would just be patient with me, you'll see the value of this by the end. Having 3 sons and discovering she was pregnant again, this woman was distraught because they could hardly feed the 3 boys they already had. Plus of the German occupation, she was fearful. She had called her sister over, and she had dressed, and she was on the way out the door to go see a doctor to do what we're talking about, reduction termination. Just at that moment, her husband is getting back to the house, and he asks his wife, "Where are you going?" And she explained to him, and he said, "We're not going to be doing that. If God can provide for 3 boys, He can certainly provide for 1 more." And so she took her coat off and sat back down, and that termination did not take place because he would have nothing of it. As a result, a few months later, boy number 4, Gyuri, Laszlo's younger brother, arrived. There's another wrinkle to the story, and I have to go into the 2nd chapter to make sense. Because Laszlo's mother was also a Jew. Not the father, but the mother. According to Jewish tradition, every child would have on the certificate whatever the faith of the mother was, but even the father had worked ahead, knowing what the Nazis were doing, and had the kids' birth certificates all changed to Protestant. At least that's the way Laszlo remembers it. But they couldn't do anything with mother's birth certificate. Eventually the Gestapo came and took Laszlo's mother and took her to the camp called Tatarza. And we all know what happened eventually to Jews who went to prison camps and eventually to execution camps. And there was grave concern. And Laszlo's dad took the three boys walking and her 7-month-old child at that time down to the fence, next picture, and saw through the fence into the internment camp and waved at their mother. Just then, an announcement came over the intercom saying, if you're a mother, step aside if you have a child who is under 1 year age and he needs care. Laszlo's mother waves her hand. Captain of the internment camp, that's my boy out there. That's Guri. He's 7 months old. And the way the Germans worked it out, she left camp that day because she had an infant under 1 year of age. And her whole life, she thanked God that she kept boy number 4. Because in keeping him, she saved herself. You just never know. We just don't know. So we ought to give God a chance. That's why every life is worth it. Shall we pause for prayer?